Welcome back to the Finding Genius video series. I'm joined with Matt Renfro, the founder of Lynx. Lynx is a leading API connected healthcare payments platform, banking, e-commerce, and it's emerged from stealth with nearly $18 million in equity fundraising, working with healthcare investors including Obvious, First Cressy, 406, and more. Matt, it's great to be joined with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to have the discussion.
So, just before we get into more of the technical and how Lynx works, could you start by describing, because I know you spent a number of years at Optum building out Optum Pay. Could you talk a bit about broadly the healthcare payments infrastructure and what you were doing with Optum, and then where you began to see the opportunity in the ecosystem to start Lynx?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. So I spent about 6 years at Optum and United Health Group. Within Optum, there is something called Optum Financial Services, which houses an FDIC chartered bank, Utah Industrial Chartered Bank, which was primarily used for the administration of health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, and they were, and they're still pretty close to the nation's largest HSA administrator. And I was chief product and strategy officer of that division. Separately, we had what was called Optum Electronic Payments and Statements. We rebranded it to Optum Pay, but think this was a function that was mostly an internal function to get rid of paper checks, as far as when United Healthcare and other payers, TPAs, would want to pay their providers. And we had this network of north of, at the time, 1.5 million providers who gave us their banking instructions and said, really, Optum, whether it's United Healthcare or if it's another payer, you have my consent to pay me at this bank account. And we would electronically transmit $200 billion a year. This was back in 2018. So I don't know what the number's up to at this point. But yeah, where my head was at was really, well, wow, we've got this bank. It's very difficult to start from a regulatory perspective after the financial collapse in 2008. We've got this payment network that has been used to eliminate paper checks, because Envision, instead of United mailing out a paper check, they had this direct deposit function. But it really doesn't act how a MasterCard or Visa or Amex works. And how can we change that? But also, you've got this connectivity between the payers and providers that nothing would stop you from enabling consumers to pay on those same electronic rails. So that's where my head was. How do we enable not just United and other plans, but enable potentially millions of consumers to pay electronically any doctor in the country with a click? And yeah.
And why was it set up that way, where it's not kind of the traditional payment rails, the way the rest of the financial services industry works? Why is it so convoluted in healthcare in the first place?
Yeah, specific to how that was set up, it is pretty similar as far as, you could think of it as a closed loop payment network. It has the same banking instructions. We're talking about, account and routing numbers. And I'd say, why was it not set up the same way? If you just look up the history of Visa and MasterCard and this joint venture of banks that started Visa, or maybe I'm mixing it with MasterCard, it was on the notion of creating these real-time payment transaction rails that helped connect the issuing bank with the merchant bank, with the actual merchant. So you could start to get rid of cash and really have this, electronic process. And I'm probably, drastically oversimplifying like how that was set up. And in American Express's case, that really started as more of a travel rewards card, and they've got their own bank, and now it's expanded to a massive reach to millions of merchants. but they've got their own intricacies and how they were developed. And in this healthcare use case, it wasn't set up, United and Optum or some of the other players, they weren't set up to create efficiencies related to the shift to how consumers will engage in paying for care. It was really, a large health plan can be printing and mailing tens of millions of paper checks and remittance advices a year. And it's very costly on not just the plan, but also the provider, who might be getting paid by 300 different TPAs and health plans. And it's a broken reconciliation process for the provider. So there were some regulatory changes that mandated that plans need an electronic payment option. And Optum and United, with the scale, were able to develop this massive network. And they're in an amazing position with their acquisition of Change Healthcare, and how many dollars are flowing through to take, really what I'm talking about. And maybe they can create the Amex of healthcare on the back end because they have all the assets. So, but it's, there's a lot of legacy infrastructure they have to upgrade.
Totally. So you're leading Optum Pay in a big way at this point in time. And so you continue sort of building out this infrastructure for the industry to operate more efficiently. At what point did you decide that, or what was the thesis of leaving Optum Pay to go and launch Lynx?
Yeah, but before I left Optum Pay, I think I'd been in that financial services division for a while, and there were different ideas from leadership at Optum as far as should they create a should they have a real direct to consumer business. And so at the beginning of COVID, or actually before COVID, beginning of 2020, I actually left to stand up a direct to consumer business within Optum. And I won't bore you too much with that, but long story short, it's called the Optum Store. It's now, I believe, they're partnering up with Red Ventures, and I stood up that division in partnership with others by November of 2020, the initial iteration. But I kind of saw during my time in financial services and starting to look into, I guess healthcare e-commerce is really, if I am a massive health plan like a United or an Anthem or really any health plan, and I start to look at, well, what I don't think the HSA experience works the way I'd like it to. And I'd like to create a new type of fintech experience that helps consolidate the healthcare wallet, helps guide people to be able to understand and pay their medical bills, and guides them to saving time and money across the provider and pharmacy network. I've got an issue. I don't have, the Stripe version or what we are is more of a banking as a service provider, but there's contemporaries called Galileo, Marketa, who really have this great infrastructure for a United potentially to build this financial experience for their members. In healthcare, you have legacy claim systems who are attempting to act like banking in 2022, but it's more comparable to a claim system from 2002. Right. And what we really identified is, these large distributors don't have this best-in-class banking and payment partner to turn to build on top of. Whether it's in that commercial space or in Medicare, you've got millions of these prepaid debit cards that are smart enough to decline the cigarettes at point of sale at a retailer, but will accept a healthy food or an over-the-counter product. But it's largely built off of gift card infrastructure. And so what we really, I was kind of just debating, is it time for me to go do something on my own? I had an offer or a few offers to do something in private equity, something in an established venture capital backed company. But I really saw this opportunity to bring a platform that does mimic what we expect in our personal lives for the USAs of the world, or the Capital Ones of the world, and how can we unlock that to the large health insurers, the large benefits administrators, potentially retailers, to embed the solution of the future from banking, payments, e-commerce. And I guess the last thing I'd say is beyond the pure tech infrastructure upgrade, the other thesis it's not even a thesis, it's more of a fact that we've seen, and you could see it in the social determinants of health and other just data and population insights, is a person's health and finances are directly correlated. So if someone's socioeconomic status declines, their health status tends to follow, and that manifests itself in not only worse outcomes for maybe that person has to go to Western Union and take on check cashing fees, but they also can't afford to maybe eat healthy or do their preventative visit. And these industries are so disconnected, healthcare and financial services, that we really have had this mission of how can we close this gap between health and finance, whether it's the most vulnerable people and how we can use the high engagement levels of fintech to engage people in their health, or if it's, the higher earning population who's just trying to pre-plan for those unexpected, that gap between Medicare and, the healthcare expenses that Medicare won't cover in retirement. There's a huge disconnect as far as how these industries build solutions for people when it is directly tied. And so, all that combined really led us to go try to start Lynx, and we have it off the ground, and it's anyway, it's been pretty fun.
Yeah, I think that's also interesting because the way you speak about the problems, both on the fintech and the healthcare side, it's something you very intricately understand. But another founder coming at this and trying to launch a business in the space, and we've seen attempts of people who maybe have never worked in industry to go and try to launch this because they recognize that it is a problem or they've been on the receiving end of it. Can you talk a bit about that? Of the name of the podcast is Finding Genius. So what some of the VCs that I interviewed for the book were saying is that genius is someone who has kind of personally been in the industry and they have a lot of the insights there. Could you talk a bit more about how you leaned into that in order to go and actually build a business? And then post Optum Store, this was really your first entrepreneurial endeavor outside of kind of the confinements of the four walls of a larger company. So what was that experience like of actually building the partnerships, hiring the first people, some of the first early challenges you faced in the first 6 months too? It'd be great to hear more about those anecdotes.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd say being in the industry and knowing some of these challenges, I think most people personally have experienced, hey, this HSA card, why doesn't it just work like my Bank of America app? Or why doesn't it just work like, my Chime bank app? But there's reasons why it's complex. When you start to layer in the healthcare regulatory components and you start to, really look into, well, what does your data model need to be to support a health plan that in one region needs to set up their programs based on different regulatory functions than others? Or maybe they're supporting employers in one market who have a unique population in California versus Florida. And how do you have this complex data model that gets very custom? But there's some of those kind of intricacies that if you're just thinking, hey, I'm going to build a better HSA, the B2B complexity is no joke, like just putting it simply. But from a founder perspective, that thesis or fact that I had as far as, someone's health and finances are directly tied, but these industries don't talk to each other. That's one of the challenges I had in talking to investors, as far as you've some investors like Oak and, there's probably a number of others that do specialize in both fintech and healthcare. But for the most part, there are healthcare investors and there are consumer and fintech investors, and they don't generally intertwine. And so for all intents and purposes, we're a fintech company. We have fintech products. We do dabble a little bit in the e-commerce side, but we're a fintech. With that said, we have to sell into healthcare. And so some of the challenges are really, how do you get these strategic investors on the healthcare side who have LPs with the people we want to sell, who are very smart people? How do we get them to have an understanding of, well, what is this fintech platform? Why does it matter for the health insurer? And then on the flip side, when we talk to fintech investors, they understand what we're doing. They understand what we're doing, but they might not understand the complexities or why this is, potentially a home run for the healthcare industry. And so that kind of proved itself out as far as when we were talking to investors. You can't really take for granted that, the healthcare investors will know much about what our actual product is and vice versa. It's very similar. Our team kind of innately knows the complexities of healthcare, but you still have to, bring very smart people up to speed on why it matters for their space.
And so post-launch of Lynx, where is it today? You scaled up this B2B sales motion. You've gotten the investors. You've gotten obvious First Cressy, the healthcare investor, plus the health system and all the relationships with the kind of the healthcare ecosystem side. And then building and scaling the fintech. What insights do you have based off of the state of where Lynx is now? Like, how do you manage that B2B sales cycle? And what are the other areas that you're thinking about that Lynx will continue to grow into based off where it is today?
Yeah, I'd say we have a pretty defined sales cycle in healthcare. So let's just say our platform, when talking to a large health insurer that touches both Medicare, commercial, or I should say, all lines of business, Medicaid, commercial, Medicare, we generally have built our platform to support all their lines of business. So they don't need 4 or 5 different debit card and payment partners based on their line of business. We're equipped to be their one integration point, whether it's a gift card or incentive card in Medicare, or if it's a true bank account and payment infrastructure in the commercial space. They can kind of ditch those legacy administrative fees and work with Lynx, and we can generally flip that to a large revenue channel for them. Very similar to how the payment industry works if you're talking about an Amex and Delta and what that means for Delta as the acquisition channel. But, in Medicare in particular, it's very defined. The Medicare plans, if they want to have a payment card, they need to embed that as part of their Medicare bids, in the spring of, let's just say for right now, we're talking to Medicare plans about 1/1/24. But by March to June, they need to choose their vendors. And so there's a lot of predictability as far as, well, what plans are looking for this tactical need? Will they choose us, between that March and June timeline? And how do we operationally get ready to potentially distribute tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of payment cards to seniors? And not as defined, but in the commercial space, we haven't had a lot of disagreements, whether it's a financial institution who still has to work with these legacy HSA software systems, or if it's a benefits administrator or a payroll provider or a commercial health plan. Most of these distributors are not happy with the one-size-fits-all approach that is a disconnected experience from where they're investing their capital. And so there are different levels of, there's certain banks that want to get it off of their vendors now. And there's certain health plans that maybe want to pilot, a subset of their population and over time look at kind of disintermediating their vendor with an embedded fintech approach. And so for us, we kind of say in our team meetings, we don't really have a bad sales discussion. I think we're in a good position as far as what we are. We're the only, I think, embedded fintech platform focused on healthcare. And those are kind of the tactical channels. How do we upgrade the infrastructure on HSA and FSA? How do we get a part of the bids with these large Medicare plans aligned to their plan year? And beyond that, we're just opportunistic as far as, our platform's open to anyone that wants to have a financial relationship with their patient, consumer, member. So there are several retailers who are looking at what Amazon and CVS are doing and thinking, well, we need to get into healthcare. And so there's interesting discussions we have there related to that's not tied to anything like a healthcare plan year around, well, can you combine a loyalty program with how people maybe can get healthy food if they're at risk for diabetes to how, the actual spending happens in the store. So anyway, that hopefully that gives you a general.
That's helpful. Yeah. Right. I know we're almost out of time. So just the last question. When we had spoken first, you were saying that you're seeing a ton of interesting opportunities in healthcare and just broad shifts that are taking place. You just mentioned CVS and kind of what that's doing on the healthcare side. The shift towards digital payments. Where else are you seeing opportunities or challenges on the behavioral health ecosystem, perhaps on the digital health side, perhaps as it interacts with mobile payments, or just more broadly speaking to where founders could be excited or engaged about building things, especially as we go into a little bit of a downturn in the market?
Yeah, I'd say there's a ton of opportunities, and I get the challenge for us is how do you stay focused while staying opportunistic? Because we have I'm not going to go into details on who we were actually talking to today, but I had a discussion this morning. It was not on my radar at all, and it's a large retailer that has a provider organization, but there's a lot of opportunities out there for different founders. What I'd kind of say for different ideas that might be applicable to different founders, I'd say generally what has not been tapped, and we have different applications that we've flirted with, should we just come up with our own app in this space, really related to the financial first mentality that people have. So at Optum and other, health insurers, they have to attempt from a population health perspective to engage people into the health programs that are at their disposal from their employer, whether it's, to get someone to quit smoking or to get on a weight loss program, thinking about all these other chronic illnesses. And it's kind of a field of dreams if we built it. Hopefully people will engage. It's largely based on telemarketers trying to call people to tell them, hey, we think you have diabetes, you should go through this program. But people, when you actually think about it, where are people actually engaged? You're engaged in your financial experience. I'm going to check, even on a smaller scale, I'm going to check my HSA balance on a monthly basis to ensure I can cover my medical bills. When you're talking about my everyday spending, I might, for different populations, we're probably talking about daily engagement to ensure I can cover, the utility bill in my Cash App or in, Chime. And so there's interesting opportunities when you start to just think about this intersection as far as, well, could there be the Chime, where, and I'm saying Chime, it's a, neobank. Could there be the Chime with a healthcare twist, where this is the place where I can, get my paycheck faster, but there's a lot of dollars and profitability infusions if you could start to maximize a person's health or financial engagement to engage them in their health. So maybe this Chime for healthcare would be, let's reward people for going through the weight loss program, or maybe there's other programs at their disposal. But there's a lot of opportunity at that intersection that, potentially could be built on top of our platform. But anyway, if you research different populations, you could probably find 1 million as far as, well, how do we combine this intersection.
I appreciate that. Matt, thank you so much for the time. This is great.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.